Welcome back to the series, which is your one-stop shop for checking out all things module and Descendant DPS wise. Now, if you haven't seen the previous two episodes just yet and are new to what these videos do, we take a deep dive into fully maxed out modules that Descendants can equip to bulk out their skill power and modifiers, looking at all 30 combinations that can be done with the attack and battle mods, and find out which of these I'd recommend to you for your builds going forward. In today's episode, we'll be looking at everyone's favourite Void Battle killer that wasn't Kyle for those random 3 days, rip Kyle, and that's going to be Lepic. We'll take a look into how to max out his damage with both his damaging skills, so his skills 1 and 4, and then we'll also take a few forward after the controlled environment tests and see how those numbers stack up when they are used with equipment. Now, in the case of this testing, I will be using Ultimate Lepic, but both of these can still be applied because, in theory, the same thing will be applied. So, you know, standard modifiers and everything like that. The numbers essentially are the same for Lepic as well as Ultimate Lepic, even if they differ slightly depending on their modifiers themselves. Now, of course, if you do love this type of content and you want to see more, do us both a solid and hit that subscribe button so you can be notified when more videos like this go live. With this, I've now already covered 3 Descendants, and we've got plenty more to visit as well as more build videos to come to the channel. So if you love TFD like I do and want me to break down the best mods for your main Descendant, you won't find a better place to be. With all that now out of the way, let's get into the ground rules as to how this was done and that controlled environment. Now, as with the other 2 videos, this will be completely off script, so therefore, if I do go around a little bit and go off in a tangent, that's completely par for the course, so you're just going to have to give me a gimme on that one. But in terms of like how we made this a controlled environment, what we wanted to do is be able to use the testing environment, which you're able to use in the laboratory section, and you're able to just kind of like control everything that is in there in terms of like the enemies and everything. So what we did here was that we did use a legendary reactor. This was fully powered up, but we did not use it so it was matching, and we also just purely used it only for that base power. So when it comes to the rolls at the bottom, they weren't doing anything beneficial apart from boosting our range, for example. So nothing that's going to affect the damage. And on top of that, with the extra rolls in terms of like, because Lepic is primarily going to be, in terms of like damage, is going to be fire and tech, we made sure that those rolls weren't on there for the actual rest of the reactor as well. So we made sure not to use a burning reactor, and we made sure that there wasn't any kind of tech rolls on there. We also made sure that we didn't use a legendary weapon or any kind of weapon that was equipped that matched the mounting that was on there as well. So this is just pure base power that is just going to get fed into all of these skills. Now, also on top of that, my Ultimate Lepic was taken at level 31 for these testing. To be completely honest with you, the level of the character does not make a difference whatsoever. The reason why is because we don't get any increase to our skill power through leveling in this sense. We only get increases to our skill power through our reactor that we do have placed into our build. So therefore, it doesn't really matter if I'm level 1 or level 40. It's not going to make a difference, but it is worth me mentioning that to you, so you can just see that for yourselves, basically. On top of that, the enemy that we are going to be testing this on is going to be the same one throughout, and on top of that, this is going to be a level 100 enemy. The main point of these DPS calculations, and something that was pointed out to me when we did the first one with Freyna, is the fact that we want something that's going to be consistent, something that's going to be similar to what we're experiencing when we go into the games. So therefore, I did make sure to make a change for the previous one, and I'm going to be carrying that on forward for the rest of the series, that these are going to be level 100 enemies going forward. And then lastly, when it comes to our loadouts in terms of like set bonuses or anything like that, so in terms of components, these are just purely going to be swapped over to purple pieces, so therefore we're not going to see any bonuses to like our fire, to our tech, to our skill power, or anything like that. And then as well as that, when it comes to our modules that are going to be fitted into our loadout while we're doing all this testing, the only thing that's going to be on there is going to be the one that boosts our capacity. So in this case, it's going to be my mid-air maneuvering, and the reason why that was there was because at the time I thought I was going to need something to be able to help me get back to the pad so I can reset my skills, but it turns out didn't need to do that in the end. It was just purely there for that. So, but it's not giving us any extra damage to any of our skills, it's just purely giving us capacity, and it just kind of sat there in the thing. So the other modules that we will have equipped will be the ones that we are testing at the time, and of course we have 5 attack mods and 6 battle mods. In the case of the attack mods, we have our tech specialist, our technician, our focus on tech, our maximize power, and our skill simplification. And then when it comes to our battle mods, or our 6 that we've got fire specialist, power increase, fire master, Focus on Fire, Maximize Skill, and Tech Master. Now, between these 11 mods, we are able to mess about with about a bunch of things. Now, obviously, there are things in the yellow category that do actually give us some, depending on where you actually use them, and they give us some like little bonuses if you meet certain criteria and everything like that. So these are just purely looking at the consistent increases to our damage. I am aware that there was one that we can also put on that is going to give our crit resistance, and it also gives us an extra bonus in terms of specific kind of skill power. I haven't looked at those. Main reason why is because you won't be primarily using those for DPS, and also at this moment in time when it comes to like crit resistance and all that kind of thing, I'm not entirely sure what the point of that is to him. So not many people do actually slot those onto the builds. So the main point was going to be looking at the ones that are going to be primarily affecting your main sources of damage, and that is the reason why I've only looked at these 11 mods. So now that we've covered what modules I'm going to be using inside of this testing, we can actually talk about how I managed to do my damage testing, and then we can see as to the numbers themselves. So what we're going to do is talk about how the base skill and how everything, like all the numbers were recorded. So what I did was I made sure we'd had no modules equipped apart from the mid-air maneuvering, and I then threw out the skill. What I did then was record this number, and so with the grenade throw, this is really nice and simple. It is literally just the one effect. This is just one piece of damage, and then after that, with the ultimate, this is going to be two forms of damage because we have the impact damage, and then we also have the lingering effect, the damage over time that's going to be when enemies are within that radius. So I then took that as well because we do have to add that into our damage calculations, and that is something that we should prepare ourselves for. So with our grenade throw, for example, we've got this out at 32,931 points of damage. With our ultimate, this came in at 155,279 points of damage, and then the damage over time that's left from lingering over that is 2,463. So those are our base numbers. Going forward, then after that, we're going to be looking at our percentage increases, and I was quite surprised at some of them because I believe the attack mods basically affect your modifiers, and then your battle mods affect your skill power, and that's usually how they kind of coincide and work together. So because of the attack mods, we're not going to see a huge increase until we get to that damage over time. So for example, with Tech Specialist, we can see a 13% increase over our grenade throw, but we see a 2.76% increase when it comes to our actual impact damage for our ultimate, but we do get a whopping 173.81% increase when it comes to the damage over time that's going to be affecting that. So essentially, if you're going for an attack mod, you're looking for something that's going to be helping you with that extra damage over time from the lingering effect, and that means that, to be fair, you don't necessarily need one of these actually slotted in. In terms of like the actual main, just purely by themselves, they're not really doing enough, they're not helping you out enough to be able to warrant that extra, that increase in terms of, or to be able to slot in for that 16 space, or 8 space if you do have the module slotted in. Now this does change a little bit differently once we start having a look at the battle mods, because the battle mods will be affecting your skill power modifiers, and that means that because we have the higher multipliers already on Lepic, we're actually going to see a bigger increase when it comes to those numbers. So if we have a start with the skill 1, we can see that with Fire Specialist we can get an 81.2% increase to our damage just from slotting that one in, and I believe that is fairly consistent with the item card itself, and we will see that going forward as well. When it comes to like power increase, this is a flat 65% increase to our skill power, and you can see that again that we do have a 65% increase. Obviously the main kind of standout when it comes to here is that Maximize Skill does give us the biggest kind of modifier here. But then we also have Tech Master, which interestingly enough does give us a bonus to the amount of damage that we will be dealing, but on top of that it also gives us the biggest increase when it comes to our damage over time, because it affects our skill power as well as our skill power modifier. Now I have put some little extras on the side so you can see which ones have the negative, like kind of, or the bits of downside to them if you do manage to equip those on. And you can see that we do have Maximize Power and Skill Simplification as well as Maximize Skill. They both have something that comes as a drawback if you do actually use those. So while they do have the biggest amount of power, they do have something that's going to basically hinder the rest of your build. Now this is something that we do need to factor in with Lepic, because if you are primarily using him as a boss killer, yes, you want that instant burst, you want that, you know, but we've seen people be able to instantly take down bosses within like 10 seconds because of his ultimate, but on top of that, if you don't get that one burst kill, if you don't get that one set rotation or anything like that, then it's going to be a painful wait until you actually manage to get your ultimate up again. And that does mean that if you use Maximize Power as well as Maximize Skill, you will be doubling your weight when it comes to your ultimate, and, you know, depending on your DPS calculations or how you want to kind of rock him, it's probably not going to be worth it in the long run, outside of void battles at the very least anyway. So those are all the base numbers, so now we get to have a quick look as to what happens if we combine these and we start doing combinations. Now, like I said, this is all 30 combinations. I did make a slight error on my previous one. I did have the cooldown in the wrong place, or in terms of like the red text and everything like that. But I have been through this, I have double checked, and I've also color coordinated it so you can see what the color of the mods are, as well as which ones have bad downsides or just pure downsides, and then ones that also have good upsides, or, you know, which ones are a bit in the middle, like as in like you might be able to get away with these depending on how you want to do this. So this is the table right here. You can see right at the top that we do have maximize power, maximize skill completely dominating that top bit, and you know, for good reason, because that is the biggest increase to our skill modifier that we can get. It's also the biggest modifier to our skill power. It makes sense that because of those combinations, it is going to give us the biggest increase out there. What I was quite surprised at is actually how close it is at the top, and if it's actually worth justification when it comes to that extra cooldown. So as you can see here, when it comes to the grenade skill, we get 118.4% boost to our damage. We have a 94.13% increase to our impact damage for our main ultimate, and then we also have just shy of 500% increase when it comes to the damage over time. But if you drop that down to skill simplification and maximize skill, instead you actually get 114.68% increase. So we're around about like 3% of maybe even 4% out in terms of like pure damage right there. And this gets even smaller if you swap it over to the impact damage of your main ability, because this then gets down to 0.8% difference between those. And what you're sacrificing is, instead of having a plus 100% cooldown, so doubling your cooldown on your ultimate ability, instead we're doing it by 50%, so we're getting an extra half on top of that, and instead we're also losing an extra minus 25% of our maximum MP. So the trade-offs are kind of there as to which ones you kind of want to go for. I would say that when it comes to if you are trying to use Lepic for his ultimate in terms of bossing and everything like that, any decrease that you have to your mana is not going to be a great idea. I would highly recommend that you do try and stay clear of skill simplification if you can. But what I also thought was a really nice pattern is if we have a look into column B when it comes to this, it means that maximize skill is the best one to be able to slot in terms of pure damage, and then it becomes fire specialist. So depending on how you want to play around with those downsides or anything like that, you can either go for maximize skill to be able to have these so obviously you get a 94.13% increase to your impact damage for your ultimate. But if you do drop that and then instead go for fire specialist instead, this then at the top of that category drops down to 87.51. So if you're looking for pure raw DPS, pure raw killing power, maximize skill is the way to go. If you are looking for ways that you can still use the ability like every 60 seconds, I think it is, then fire specialist is going to be a better way of being able to go. You will lose out on damage, but it just makes it more feasible in being able to have that uptime. And if you actually do go for fire specialist and focus on tech, you still have respectable damage. Yes, you are losing out on around about 13k points worth of damage before we look into the rest of the build, but you actually get a positive here of a minus 0.6.1% cooldown, which is going to help you out with your ultimate. It's also going to help you out with the rest of your abilities, and it means that you have something that's a bit more consistent to throw out. So for the next step, what I wanted to do is take 4 of my favourite recommendations. What 4 in terms of like what is the most amount of damage we can do. We're going to avoid anything that's going to be costing into our MP, and the reason why, like I've already stated, is that it's going to affect the duration and how often you can use your skill and everything like that. So we're going to ignore anything that's going to have skill simplification in it for that reason. But feel free, if that's the way you want to be able to go for, then more power to you. So instead, what we're going to do is take 4 of my favourites. We're going to take maximize power and maximize skill, because that is the most amount of DPS that we can get. We're then going to go into tech specialist and maximize skill, which is the 3rd strongest combination that exists on that screen, and that is going to have a 50% cooldown instead of 100. And then we're going to take tech specialist and fire specialist, which has no downsides and no upsides. And lastly, we're going to have that focus on tech and fire specialist that we've already talked about, which does have an upside. By using these 4, then we're able to chuck this into a reactor being activated. So we have gone for a bonus in terms of the mounting and everything like that. We have gone into the fire, we have gone into the tech, but we've tried to avoid any kind of extra bonuses in terms of rolls at the bottom of the reactor as well. So it's just purely looking at that base skill power if we do manage to get that mounting right. And these are the stats that we're able to see here. So that you can start seeing that we are able to spread it out a little bit more because of that extra skill power that's going to be thrown in. And because of that extra skill power that's being thrown in, maximize skill is just really going to kind of run away with it because it has the bigger number that is able to chuck it into it when it comes to its modifier. But you can still see that you know, maximize skill and tech specialist is kind of keeping up. It's in terms of like the base damage that it's going to be dealing on the actual impact. Not too far away whatsoever, and then you know, that's 30 seconds worth of cooldown that you've pretty much saved right there. But you can see that there is a big difference between going from those two to tech specialist and fire specialist, and focus on tech and fire specialist. This does get compounded a little bit more once we do start having a look at equipment though, because if we do throw the Slayer set, which is commonly used when it comes to Lepic, and being able to use it for boss fights because it gives us an extra 26.1% skill power, then you can kind of see it just it disappears a little bit more. So we do have maximize power and maximize skill still being that very top section right there, which is going to give a 409.51% bonus. But tech specialist and maximize still technically kind of keeps up there at 405.94%. But remember, these bonuses or these differences get a little bit more exaggerated once we start throwing everything else in. So for like crit modifiers and everything like that, because it is a smaller number, you're not going to see as big of a number. But you know, it's one of those that you need to be able to play around with, and you need to decide for your own kind of build. Which way do you want to go for? Are you happy with that extra cooldown because you're playing solo and you want to jump off the edge and that's how you reset your cooldowns? Or do you want to go for like tech specialist and maximize skill so that you have that extra damage, but you've got something that's a little bit, something that you can work around, which is going to be that 50% cooldown. Me personally, if you are going for that boss killer, I do think that maximize power and maximize skill is going to be the way to go. Just keep in mind that if you don't have the full setup currently, you will technically struggle to be able to do that one phase. So you just need to have everything in. You need to have the perfect reactor, you need to have the Slayer set already pretty much raring to go, and you need to have all these modules kind of maxed out as well. But there we go, that are all the findings when it comes to Lepic. Now, obviously, none of this uses the overclock ability, which does give us extra skill power. So once again, maximize power, maximize skill will go a little bit further with those bonuses. But I wanted to get the base numbers because that is something that can be controlled as well with that ability, because it is a base number that gets thrown in. And once again, you know, if you have higher modifiers or multipliers when it comes to your build, when it comes to your modules, then you're going to see a bigger increase or a bigger return on your damage. So, you know, this was to give you a better idea as to which ones are the best when it comes to being able to slot into that build, and then you'll be able to see some bigger numbers. But that pretty much brings us to the end of the video. Let me know in the comment section down below, what do you think about these findings? Were you rocking a different combination? Is there something that you would probably recommend? Or do you think that maybe actually having lesser cooldown and having some upsides to using your modules is better than just purely going for that raw DPS? Let me know all that and more down below. On top of that, if you think that there's another Descendant that you would love to be able to see, I have had a couple of suggestions thrown my way. I do think I might go for Valby next, especially with her Ultimate version already being out, but I think that might be the next place or the next port of call. But if you want to be able to start queuing up another Descendant, I've pretty much got almost all of them unlocked anyway. Feel free to leave that in the comment section down below as well. But either way, massive thank you for making your way to the end of the video, and as I always say, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well, and I'll see you all on our next video.